sorry. I thought I was like, oh no. Okay.
No, the NSA can record this.
Okay. So on the phone right now is Suzanne Sherman. Suzanne, could you tell them a little bit how we met, how we know each other? In your words.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. You and I met at a symposium for nullification and secession put on by the Abbeville Institute in Dallas, Texas in November, I think it was 2018. And coming together and talking to you shows that people from all political perspectives, across the board, can agree on one thing, and that is we all are right. Nobody's right, nobody's wrong. We all have a right to be governed in a manner which we desire by local representation, and clearly we do not have that with Washington, D.C. right now. And the first step is to have state secession, and I wholeheartedly support, California and CalExit's desire to secede and take power away from Washington, D.C.
And that was outstanding. Let's see if I can go 2 for 2 here. What did you think about how I was at the Abbeville Institute conference and my speech? It was okay, and I just did all right meeting conservatives, or what did you see in your words? The way you told me before I started recording.
Well, what I saw there was the fact that everybody across the political spectrum can get along if we can just get out from under a centralized government that really doesn't care about our individual beliefs or beliefs that are inherent and make the different states unique. So the states have a right to be governed in a manner in which they desire. So, the people of California clearly don't want the people of Utah telling them what they can do, and the people of Utah don't want to be restricted by states such as New York, for instance.
Wow, that's impressive. As California and the California Independence Organization, we went to the Libertarian Annual Convention last month in California, and we ran into a bunch of libertarians, and we're kind of a lefty bunch, not exclusively at all, but we asked them, we go, hey, if California's independent and we're not a donor state, then we could lower taxes, right? And isn't taxes going to something you're not getting the benefit of or paying for a conservative ideal? And they go, yeah, that's true. And I said, and if we were independent, wouldn't every business and every person in California not have to file federal paperwork? Isn't that a 50% reduction in bureaucracy? And they said, yeah, that's true. And I said, we're here at the annual convention of the libertarian movement in California. All the big libertarians, all the super conservatives there. And I said, hey, is anybody else proposing a plan to reduce taxes and reduce bureaucracy on the economy by 50%? And they said no. Does that back up what you saw when I was talking to the Abbeville Institute in Texas, 2 years ago maybe?
Yeah, exactly. You didn't come out there trying to tell what you perceived, what was written up after the fact, by the way, by a leftist organization. A bunch of white supremacists getting out there. You didn't tell us how to live. We didn't tell you how to live. What I tell people all the time is one of the reasons we have such contention across this continental landmass is every matter that was intended to be reserved by the states and never delegated to the general government is now a point of national contention. Whether or not single-sex marriages can be the law of the land, which was never to be determined by Washington, D.C., people are fighting all over the place. Ultimately, it would be best to get government out of these institutions entirely. But gun control, marijuana laws, all of these are social issues. Immigration, by the way, that's where a lot of the so-called conservatives turn me off, because I tell them, I defend California. I said, look, according to the Constitution as ratified, the very same Constitution you wave like a banner when it comes to your Second Amendment rights, all of a sudden no longer applies when it comes to California's right to regulate immigration. The problem is we have a federal government waiving benefits, bringing people in that follow them across every state. So California has a right to an open border if they so decide. the problem is because they spend so much money funding Washington, D.C. and everybody else, they are not fiscally responsible for this decision. So when I tell people that, Colorado really shouldn't have a say in immigration, people lose me, and they just don't want to tune it out anymore. But you have to remember, this country, this union sovereign states, was intended to have the central government be very, very limited in nature, and they throw off those restraints very early on, and that's why we are having so much contention and discord that we're seeing right now. And secession is lawful. Forget the myth that we are told in schools about patron Saint Lincoln, about Texas versus white. Secession is still legal, absent an Article 5 Convention of the States and 3/4 of the states ratifying it. Nothing has changed. People need to let go of that lie and retake their principle of consent by the governed. We should be thinking right now principles that were stated in the Declaration of Independence.
So correct me if I'm wrong. Tell me if I'm not getting this right. But it sounds like you're saying if California wants to be independent, conservatives should all across America support that and say, hey, that's your right to do that. And that's one of our basic ideas.
Wholeheartedly. The problem is conservatives, the term conservative doesn't in any way imply limited government. One of the things I've tried to appeal to conservatives is that government should be limited and the states have their sovereign and independent powers. Well, both sides adhere to that as long as it is a side that they are comfortable with. So, for instance, California has very liberal, no pun intended, marijuana laws. Recreationally in California, Utah is very stringent. They had to fight tooth and nail to get medicinal marijuana use, but we have much more freedom when it comes to firearms laws. So, man, if I could have a state that would give me both, I would be so there. But, this is the problem when you have also government trying to control all of our decisions. And again, ultimately, I think the first step would be to have states seceding individually, and then also ultimately them breaking up into smaller versions and local communities ruling what suits their standards and their social ways the best.
That's what I call Leopold Kohr. Breakdown of Nations. Leopold Kohr and the Breakdown of Nations. He wrote that book in 1954 in America. He predicted that America would become an empire bent on conquering the world just like the Soviet Union. His book did not do well in 54, but he also predicted that the government was going to be too big, things just wouldn't work, and he was saying this in the heyday when America was doing great. He was looking at the system and he goes, okay, that's working now, but at some point, you guys love expansion so much, it's going to get too big, and things just aren't going to work. And you're going to go, how come we look like a failed government on schools, roads, this program, that program? And he predicted the whole thing. And his solution was exactly what you just said right now, Suzanne. He said, break it down, break it down, break it down, smaller. Just keep breaking it down into these smaller units, because if you look at Europe and around the world, they typically function better. Exactly your point.
And, the anti-federalists said the same thing. George Mason refused to sign the Constitution in Philadelphia. Patrick Henry said he smelled a rat. They saw this was going to happen. And Robert E. Lee felt that if the Union had won, that a strong central government was going to be despotic at home and tyrannical abroad. Ask the people of Yemen what they feel about what our government's doing to them. And what's happening, to people here. So I think those that prognosticated this tyrannical government were absolutely correct. And the one way to break it down is to take the power away from D.C. Again, stop filing these federal tax forms. It would be really nice to be free from that. And guess what? Those that want to stay loyal to the Union, I know Utah would for a fact, can do so. Nobody here is advocating overthrowing Washington, D.C. We're just saying, just like the Confederate States of America said, by the way, we want to be left alone. We want to peacefully coexist with you and run our states, run this nation that we have founded the way we see fit, and not just like California is financing others, just like they were financing Northern interests.
So let me ask you a question, if I can. You have lived in many states, I think, throughout the Midwest, and you have a radio program where you talk to people who are coming from many states. So you have a fair idea of what conservatives in the middle of America think. Is that a fair thing to say?
I would think so.
Okay. Well, I have to say that to establish the credibility before I ask you a question, because then if I ask the question without it, people are like, well, she don't know, and that's the truth. And I'm like, she does know, and she is the kind of person to answer this question. Yeah.
I was a hardcore right-winger, and that I saw things as there's a right and a left, and that's right and wrong, and I have seen right now that, you know what, not everybody's going to agree, and when we try to compel agreement from Washington, D.C., this is like people in Spain letting somebody in Moscow run their lives. And you have to respect the differences that people have. The interesting thing is you can't both say we all need to come together and we all need to be diverse. We have to respect people's differences so people will stop fighting. When this experiment started, when the Constitution was ratified, there was one representative in the House per 35,000 people. That even is kind of sketchy. But with a limited government, that's okay. Now we have a government that has unlimited powers and one representative for every 750,000 people or so, and take that to another extreme and say, look at how many people turn to the Supreme Court to ultimately resolve our biggest disputes. They're resolved by 5 out of over 350 million. No wonder everybody's fighting.
Yeah. Yes. That's how we came together. I was there at the Abbeville Institute conference in Texas, saying I was a Latino liberal, proud lefty from California, but that I saw and thought things were getting bad, and people were not being able to agree reasonably anymore. And to head off where the trend was going, it would be better for us to peacefully divorce. And people loved that. People were like, yes, I think it's getting bad too. I don't hate you, but people can get out of hand. They just can. And riots just seem to pop up out of nowhere, and everybody goes, how's that? What happened? And it's like, well, it was brewing. You paid no attention. Before we get there, let's let off that steam valve. Everyone I talk to who's conservative agrees completely with that message. Would you say that's something conservatives in your experience would agree with, that worldview?
No, absolutely not. They have taken the Lincolnian view. I think the people that you have met in these events that we have been to, they are people that are far more educated. The people that are the traditional mainstream conservatives, the ones that I deal with too, are the ones that have been taught the Lincolnian version of America. Don Livingston, who hosted that event where we attended, speaks frequently of two Americas. So when I, for instance, get into the debate on immigration, I will tell people, okay, we're both right, but it depends on what America we're talking about here. The Jeffersonian version of America, which was supposed to be the states having most of the power and the federal government being very limited in nature, that is one America. But then we have the Lincolnian Hamiltonian version of America that took place, as we know, in the 1860s, and that's where we become one united state across this continental landmass, and they absolutely do not believe in secession. They think it is illegal, and California has no right to leave. And what blows my mind is, on the one hand, they can say, we hate you so much, but you can't leave. And this is exactly what happened against Southern independence. Well, we hate these people so much, but we need your money. And, it's interesting because the Californians have more in common with the CSA than they really realize. And once they get rid of the preconceived notions of racism and hatred and slavery, which really wasn't what the war against Southern independence was about, they can realize, you know what? These people had a say, and they actually had justice and the law on their their side. We need to stop the racism card when we talk about the Civil War and realize we have a lot more in common with those people who wanted to leave peacefully. Nobody's saying, hey, California, we're going to secede and then we're going to overthrow Washington, D.C. Seems to me like you're saying exactly what Jefferson Davis was saying.
Well, I get where you're coming from. Californians have a particular understanding of that war, and they're never going to change their opinion. However, I want to say totally get where you're going, and Californians can recognize the legal arguments that I think some Southern secessionists and Jefferson Davis were making that were so legitimate that even Abraham Lincoln shied away from directly addressing them. I think it's illustrative that the American government never bothered to prosecute Jefferson Davis because I think he had some points, and that's where the Cal-Exit movement's actually gone to, is where we're arguing with people here in California who are fellow left people and saying, you got it wrong. When the South said that the Constitution bakes in some of the rights of slavery, they were right. It's there. The things that you don't like about America are baked into the Constitution. Let's not act like it was all good and somebody misinterpreted it. They were all slave owners. They all backed slave owning for a long time. To then pick on the South and say, you guys did it, and you're crazy for saying that you have the right to protect these rights and you have the right to secede. And it's like, no, historically, there's a lot of evidence to that. Now, socially, I think the South and California have vastly different cultures, and that's fine. But I found a lot of conservatives who agreed with me that, yeah, there's a legal basis for states having the right to nullify and to leave. There were Southern Confederates who were pointing that out. Say what you will about their values, they were right. Their interpretation of America, early Supreme Court decisions, and what the Founding Fathers were divining was correct. And whether or not you like them, that's the law. Let's start there by acknowledging facts.
Yeah, and I think we can wholeheartedly agree that the cultures themselves are very, very different, diametrically opposed, in fact. But here's the thing that's interesting is if you go back again to the principles set forth in the Declaration of Independence, that was a secessionist document in and of itself as well. So it doesn't matter what the principles are and the people living within these different, areas and what their cultures are. They both have the same fundamental right to live underneath a government to which they consented. And that's what they both have in common. We don't have to even get into the slavery issue. When I bring up stuff about the Civil War, I don't even think about the different cultures. I just think with my legal mind about what each state and what they had the right to do at the same time. Because it's interesting, once California, the secession movement started getting popular, the racism accusations didn't come about anymore. Nobody's calling California a bunch of white supremacy, nationalists here.
Right.
But that's why I like to get away from those labels and get to the principles. And the principles set forth in the Declaration of Independence are really what we need to fall back on. And if you look at how immoral the government in Washington, D.C. has become as well, and the empire and how far-reaching this is across the world, it's just, I would love to get out from under this, and I would love to join any state that did, by the way. So, I support this. And earlier we were talking about, what happened to the Cal-Exit movement because things seem to be kind of quieting down. One thing that never happened was I never heard anybody say, you know what, I don't think California would do well on its own. We don't have the infrastructure. We don't have the financial ability to take care of ourselves. We need the United States. That never happened. One thing, two contingencies. We've got the one group that says, hey, we are going to leave, but we'll be back when Trump's out of office. But then there are the guys like you that have been consistent to your principles the entire time and never once did, it got kind of quiet. And my theory is that with the Mueller investigation, with the impeachment, everybody had their eyes focused on Trump being impeached that they kind of dropped the ball on this, and they figured secession wasn't going to be necessary. But it is necessary now more than ever.
So, from what you've seen, nobody really stopped thinking that heard about CalExit that it was a viable idea. They just stopped for whatever reasons, Mueller investigation, something in the media, and we lost a lot of steam because people thought, we'll just impeach Trump. We'll just get him out, we'll resist, and then we'll get rid of him. And so I don't really need to plan about what if he's around, and I don't need to think about systemic jeopardy to California. I'll just fix this problem real quick.
Right away. Yeah, exactly. I think the rank and file are very easily distracted. You've got people, kind of like you, myself, we stick to these principles and they don't change, regardless of who's in office.
Right.
If Bernie Sanders were elected president of the United States, I don't think you'd stop what you were doing, Marcus, and that's one of the reasons I have the utmost respect for you.
Thank you. No, I wouldn't. I was able to talk to Michael Bolden, of the 10th Amendment Center at the Libertarian Convention, and we had the same conversation. It's like, no, I said it because I meant it. I understand there's a bad history with the idea of secession. I get that, but I also think and I'll say this as a liberal who loves California values, Californians are ignorant about the laws related to secession and some of the legal history. I'm not backing things that, people are going to hate me for saying out here. I'm just saying Calhoun had a few points. He wasn't insane. Jefferson said some stuff like this too. They all kind of did. It was sort of there. And there was this place called New Hampshire or Connecticut in 1812 that had secession hearings with officials from England. And no one in America said that was illegal. And you had at least a third of the Founding Father population alive. Huge.
Yeah, there were several instances of the New England states wanting to secede, and clearly you never heard accusations of racism on that. So yeah, again, when you get away from the unfortunate connection we have between the CSA and secession, and racial bigotry and slavery and so on and so forth, if you can detach people from that and look at this from a very technical standpoint, logic, fact, everything, just common sense mandates that people need to let go. And I will say this in defense of the Californians, they're no different than the rest of anybody else in this union when it comes to education regarding secession. It's such an uphill battle because this is what we were taught. Abraham Lincoln was the greatest president in the United States. In the United States history, he saved the Union, he freed the slaves, and then we also have the greatest little bit of indoctrination of all is the Socialist Pledge of the United States, one nation indivisible. That was repugnant to the founding generation. In fact, a friend of mine wrote an article about that, and he said if George Washington had heard the Pledge of Allegiance, he would not have put his hand over his heart. He would have drawn his sword.
True.
So this indivisibleness is absolutely repugnant to our founding principles. Furthermore, if there is secession, guess what? I'm still here. You're still here. We're going to be able to communicate. People think that if the states get out from under the thumb of Washington, D.C., that life as we know it is going to cease to exist. Well, given the draconian measures that are about to be handed down in light of this virus issue, I think life as we know it is already going to be ceasing to exist. So, let's think about what we're going to do when this stops and we can focus once again on ultimately the end game for us, and that is taking power away from D.C. Again, not overthrowing, just saying, thank you very much, we've had enough, this doesn't work.
Well, that was one of the things we had talked about here in the California Independence Movement at our last CalExit Convention 8.0, available on YouTube at Marcus Ruiz Evans. We were pointing out, wow, when it really comes down to a crisis, and it's not talk, it's action, and And put up and shut up, I think, is the phrase. What are you really going to do when it really comes down to it? It was, hey, states, you're on your own. And I know some people are blaming Trump, but I got to point out, I think they don't have enough resources to bail everybody out at the same time, and so a lot of it's turned over to the states. When it really comes down to it, we saw, Texas, you're going to have to do it your way and step up. California, it's going to be up to you to do it your way. Don't count on us. We will not be there with enough resources. I see liberals in California piling it on Trump for that, but I point out to them, when we had forest fires, George W. Bush told us, better find some firefighters on your own. And when we had a recession, and we went to Schwarzenegger because the global recession started in California, and California was the worst hit in all of America, and we said, hey, Obama, liberal, why don't you hook it up with a little bit of money for an economic stimulus, and maybe we can turn the tide on this recession? And he said, tough.
Yeah, your guy.
He said tough. He said, no, you're asking for way too much. And the newspaper said Obama's right to reject California in their time of need because we're too big for the federal government to help. That was Obama. So I don't think it's all Trump. I hate Trump. I think he's a racist, but you don't have to, I'm not asking you to agree, blah, blah, blah. I just got to get that out there for Californians listening in. Yes, I do that. But I do think folks that were overly blaming Trump, the federal government was never that good at responding in a crisis to California anyways, going back 25 years. Let's just admit that. And it's on full display right now. It's up to us in California to get us to safety. It is not going to be wait for the feds. Thoughts, feelings, Suzanne? How far off am I about this?
You're absolutely spot on. And again, this is why when people say, I hate so-and-so that's in office, I had this conversation with a girlfriend of mine today. Well, Trump should have done, he should, no, stop, finish your sentence. Tell me what he should be doing differently. Just get out there. Well, he shouldn't have said this was a hoax. No, what should he have done differently? One, the problem is so many people look to one individual to solve the problems of $350 million people, I beg your pardon. And it's impossible for one person to do that. But again, if you want to sit in that office and take the credit when things are going good, you're going to take the blame when things are going bad. But this is, again, symptomatic of a government. Aristotle said there's a time when any entity is either too small or ceases to be functional because it is too large. So if it's too big, it's not going to work. If it's too small, it's not going to work. You've got to find that sweet spot, and we sure as heck aren't at that right now. We've got a government that knows it can absolutely get away with anything it wants to. We have senators selling off their stocks right before this whole coronavirus issue hit. Martha Stewart got put in prison for something similar herself. This government has said, we can do whatever they want, but God help you if you don't follow our decrees from Washington, D.C. And, really, what are people in Washington, D.C., where do they have any business telling people all the way across the continent over in California how to live their lives?
Thank you. And
I don't have a say in it either. I have, when people start criticizing California's gun laws, one thing where conservatives get really upset with me, I said, you know what? The Second Amendment was never intended to apply to the states. And California's Constitution is silent on firearms. California can flat out ban them if they want to. And it's none of your business, you over in Kansas. I actually get along these days more with the liberals than I do with the conservatives because they can't stand that.
Well, I think you're applying the principles. That's what we saw. When we went to the Libertarian Convention in California, we talked to the best libertarians, conservative minds in California at their annual convention, and all of them were there. And what we found was a lot of people who were arguing about the principles, not what was popular necessarily at the moment. And they don't always line up.
You and I can not get, when I say that I mean metaphorically, can fight back and forth on how this is going to be run, but every single election, no matter what party remains or ultimately attains the Oval Office, ultimately government wins, no matter what. This government is spending exponentially more, this administration, than the one before it, who did the same before it. This is going to continue to grow until it can no longer grow. Our deficit is our biggest problem right now. Nobody wants to talk about that. And, one of the things that the conservatives are saying, they don't like this universal basic income, but I'll be damned if they're not thrilled to get their Trump checks. And by the way, if you don't support the president, you better send your check back. I mean, this is how ridiculous the arguments are getting. But ultimately, the government keeps expanding, and they're going to take note of how easily people complied to what's going on right now. And that's getting a little off track from secession. But ultimately, I would like to see power taken away, because there's a great article. It was out of the Burning Platform called "Mr. Sociopath Goes to Washington," and they describe actually 4 different types of politicians. The 4th group actually being a statesman, but the first 3 just having the desires to control the lives of others beyond natural law. It's a great article. I'll send that to you. But if it doesn't apply to these megalomaniacs over in D.C., and the bigger this government gets, the more people we get in this country, the more draconian they're going to have to be to control us. Remember the words of John Dingell, who was a representative from Michigan, who said during the Obamacare debates, the ACA debates, we have to take over healthcare so we can control the people. And this is what happens when a politician swerves into the truth. His wranglers immediately said he misspoke. He's 90 years old. He doesn't know what he's saying. No, he said the truth. And this is all about control. They don't care about us. Ultimately, return government back to localities where people are accountable, because they see the people in the communities over whom they are ruling. Ultimately, I would like to see a completely voluntary system, but that's beyond, what we're talking about here. The first steps have to be when people think, we don't have to be chained to DC in perpetuity. Everybody's complaining about them, so why stick with them?
I do want to call out, point out something you said, and I'm going to gently push back and say, I think you're right. I think when you're talking about coronavirus response, it is relevant to CalExit, because, and this is my big appeal to conservatives right now, for all of them listening. And by the way, I'm willing to talk to any conservative newspaper. I just wrote an article for a conservative paper, or whatever the right term is, ready to talk. If California leaves, and this is what the people at the Texas Abbeville Institute conference on nullification pointed out years ago. If California leaves, it proves federalism can work. It proves devolution is a good idea. It proves smaller government is an okay idea. And if California doesn't blow up and manages to stay alive as a nation, independent from America, it will prove for conservatives, yes, you can have smaller government. And the world doesn't destroy itself. It's not the end of everything. And so you'd have a win for federalism if California was able to leave, because it would say states do have that right. And it would also prove smaller government is a good thing.
Has England collapsed?
Right.
Look at what happened after Brexit.
Right.
They seem to be doing very well. We have a lot of instances now, people around the world clamoring for less centralized government, and we need to be cheering these people on. And it's interesting how quickly people seem to have forgotten about Brexit. This whole virus has taken people's, I think, eye off the game here. And look what happened to the Hong Kong protests. These people wanted self-governance, and you don't see anything happening with these people now. Everything's just been shut down. So I want to encourage people, let's get through this crisis that we have right now. Let's learn from it, and let's figure out, yes, I appreciate your pushback. Let's figure out now how we could have handled this better from a local level with this coronavirus, and add this to our tools and our little box of tools here, and say, let's take what we learned and see how we can go forward, because this whole crisis just showed us that we could have done better than Washington, D.C., but because I think it's been proven now that D.C., with their regulations and keeping people from developing testing kits and their monopoly on certain medications, is really the one that's been allowing this to spread more than it should have and more rapidly than it should have.
So I want everybody to pay attention. Mark your calendars. What's today? It's 2:52 Pacific time. What's Suzanne? What's Sherman? What's today's date? Do you have today's date?
No.
Okay. It's a Saturday after March 21st, 2:51, 2:52 a.m. A liberal and a conservative both agreed. The reaction to coronavirus is proving smaller government is more effective. Liberal lefty California was able to respond faster and do it the way that it wanted. And it's proving through that reaction, smaller government is more effective. And that's a hardcore conservative principle. And that's being proved right now by lefty California. And a lot of lefty Californians would say, if you don't tell them it's a conservative idea, you just go, hey, isn't it cool that California just jumped ahead and did its own thing to make sure we're safer and more people are alive? They'd all say yes. If I go, yeah.
How would California feel if somebody ran to the Supreme Court who said, sorry, California, you can't do that. Tell all your people they can do what they want right now.
Right. And I'll do you another one better. I'll do you two. One, liberal Dianne Feinstein was in on the selling stocks. It's not all Republicans. They will not print that in the liberal press. You got to go to exclusively Fox News to find that out. Part two, if you walked around in California and said, isn't it cool for us Californians to back our traditional conservative principle of smaller government equals more effective government? Boo.
Oh, yeah.
Boo. If I walk around and I say, isn't it cool that California has showed that being a more independent government and not waiting for a larger Leviathan to respond is more effective? And isn't it awesome that we had a government that's 2 hours drive away from you that could respond quickly to what you want in the way that you think is the right way and you didn't have to ask anybody? Yeah, woo, yeah, right on, yeah. It's the same question.
Yeah, it is. And that's the sad thing, they become they get so focused on what solution, what letter is in support of the solution. Is it an R or is it a D? And when you go to party principles as opposed to philosophical principles, everybody gets tripped up, and like I said, it's unfortunate that we have to go back to, a big war that we had here to raise these issues. But again, I say, let's go to the first war of secession, and that was the war that took place in the 18th century, not the 19th century. So focus on those principles. They're still very valid. Some absolutely brilliant people put those in. And this is something that, has gone back for a long time. Again, going back to the Aristotelian model, where there comes a time and point where any entity is either too small or too large to function properly, and that's where we are now. We're seeing nothing but dysfunction, and I don't see any way of voting ourselves out of this. It's just going to be more and more discourse and more fighting. We shouldn't have to do that. I would love to have California secede. I would love to go there and drink their wine, enjoy the coast once again, and let them be Californians, and let me be a Utahn. We don't have to do like what happened in Kansas, where everybody has to go from one state to another to change them so it fits the way that it should fit into the national spectrum. And there should be respect for the differences we have, and let people who have values have a place to take them and live their lives in peace.
Last question, I'll let you go. But while I got you, I got to ask, because this is the one we always ask. How should a CalExit supporter from California approach a conservative in America? Would they get the conversation about, hey, this secretly supports your values? Or what's the best thing that a Californian could say to a conservative or Republican or Trump supporter or whatever you have in the Midwest, South, most of the interior 40 states inside America? How how would you lead that elevator talk? If you were on our side, what would you say?
I would say to them, ultimately, the progressive side, it's an end game. Ultimately, they are going to win. Because of the nationalization of social policies, if you want to preserve your rights as a conservative, as a Christian conservative, you are going to have to accept this notion. Otherwise, we will take over every single state. That's, to me, the key. Because the game has been lost if you try to keep fighting it the way it has been. And if we keep going this route, the left side will completely dominate this continental landmass, and eventually the conservatives will just die out. The only way to preserve different cultures is to decentralize.
I'll leave it there. Suzanne, how can people get a hold of you? Any websites, radio shows?
Yeah, since I've spoken to you last, I started a website. It's SuzanneCSherman.com. And I have published articles, many by the 10th Amendment Center, and then I have a page of blogs where I'm focusing on a lot of preparedness issues as well. These days now, I've been a prepper for over 12 years, and now all of a sudden people really want to hear what we have to say. So I've also started a Facebook page for preparedness called the Red Hot Chili Prepper. And I am going to be doing a podcast on Anchor, also called the Red Hot Chili Prepper, Chilly, because I live in Colville, the coldest city in the state of Utah. So it's just kind of a play on words there. And so that's really what I'm going to be focusing on, a much more positive message, taking a break from some of the political stuff right now, more of an uplifting thing. So I encourage people to go to that page and start listening to that show. And there is a donation button on my website. If you like what I have to say, I'd appreciate some help.
Suzanne, I don't know how to break this to you, but you realize that's a band from California that you're using in the state you're in. So just download between you and me.